Last week, the Speaker of Parliament declared that to table the motion of no confidence against the current Prime Minister, the mover of the motion needs the permission of the Minister of Law. Now, this gives the impression that the Speaker of Parliament's role is subordinate to that of the Minister of the Crown. My name is GK Ganesan, and dear friends, this is GKtv. Today's topic is, was the Speaker right to refer the motion of no confidence to a Minister of the Crown? The real question is, why is the motion called a vote of no confidence? Now, the word confidence is taken from parliamentary conventions of the House of Commons. This convention has, over hundreds of years, allowed the selection of the Prime Minister based on his ability to command the confidence of the majority of the members of the House of Commons. Malaysia, which follows the Westminster model, has a constitutionally entrenched principle of parliamentary confidence. Article 43, Clause 1 says, "The King shall appoint a cabinet of ministers to advise him on the exercise of his functions." Then come two important clauses on the structure of the cabinet. Article 43, Clause 2 states the cabinet shall be appointed as follows, that is to say, the King shall first appoint as Prime Minister to preside over the cabinet a member of the House of Representatives who in his judgment is likely to command the confidence of the majority of the members of that House, and he shall, on the advice of the Prime Minister, appoint other ministers from among members of either House of Parliament. When you look next at Clause 3, you will realize why the word confidence is crucial. Article 43, Clause 4 states, if the Prime Minister ceases to command the confidence of the majority of the members of the House of Representatives, then unless at his request the King dissolves the Parliament, the Prime Minister shall tender the resignation of the entire Cabinet. So, unless the PM commands the confidence of the majority of the MPs, the Cabinet has to resign immediately. The Constitution demands it. There's only one exception to this rule: if, at the invitation of the Prime Minister, the King agrees to dissolve Parliament. In that case, elections would be called. Now, let's look at some foundational principles and a little bit of history. Now, more than 300 years ago, in 1689, the twin monarchs William III and Mary II signed the Bill of Rights. That bill declared that the King could not rule without the people's consent, and that duty to rule fell upon Parliament. Only Parliament had the power to make laws and to rule the nation. Then came the 1700 Act of Settlement. Now, that act confirms that all officers and ministers of the Crown are to serve the people. Now, this principle in the Act of Settlement, that's more than 300 years old, is found in our modern Article Clause 4. And guess what? It makes the Cabinet subservient to Parliament. It says, Article 43, Clause 3, the Cabinet shall be collectively responsible to Parliament. Thus, the Speaker has no business asking Parliament to kneel at the feet of a Minister of Law. Next, we should ask ourselves, what does the Constitution say about the role of the government as compared to Parliament? Now, because the Constitution makes Cabinet subservient to Parliament, the Speaker cannot make Parliament become a servant to a minister. That would be to violate the Constitution. Next, must the King act on the advice of the Prime Minister all the time? Some lawyers argue that the King must obey the Prime Minister if the Prime Minister asks the King to dissolve Parliament. This view is completely wrong. The Constitution makes three provisions about the Prime Minister's right to ask the King to act in accordance with his advice. The first is Article 40, Clause 1, which has a hook at the end. It states, in the exercise of his functions under the Constitution, the King shall act in accordance with the advice of the Cabinet or a minister acting under the general authority of the Cabinet, except as otherwise provided by the Constitution. Now, why in the world would the phrase "except as otherwise provided by the Constitution" be there, unless the King is not bound to accept the advice of the Prime Minister? This question is answered in Article 40, Clause 2, which says, the King may act in his discretion in the performance of the following functions, that is to say, as far as relevant to us, first, the appointment of a Prime Minister, And second, the withholding of consent to a request for the dissolution of Parliament. So on the appointment of a Prime Minister and in refusing the dissolution of Parliament, the King needn't act in accordance with the advice of the PM. Now there is a third clause. Article 51, clause 1 states, the King shall from time to time summon Parliament and shall not allow 6 months to elapse between the last sitting in one session and the date appointed for its first meeting in the next session. Clause 2 of Article 55 states, the King may prorogue or dissolve Parliament. So even in dissolving Parliament, the King can say no to the Prime Minister. But there is a fourth reason, and it is this. When an MP is elected into Parliament, he is a trustee of the people. He must act in the best interest of the nation and the people, not in his own interest. If the Prime Minister were to advise the King so as to preserve his own post and position, then he acts in breach not only of his duty to the Constitution, but he breaches his duty as a fiduciary. Now, the right place to test whether the Prime Minister has the confidence of the House of Representatives is, you're right, the Dewan Rakyat. As simple as that. Now, let's deal with parliamentary conventions. Parliamentary conventions have the force of history behind them. They are widely observed. The great jurist and constitutionalist Sir Ivor Jennings said, parliamentary conventions provide the flesh that clothes the dry bones of the law. Now, as Malaysia follows the Westminster model, one must look to the references of parliamentary practices in Britain. The principal authority is Erskine May. It's a book called Parliamentary Practice. Even in Australia, when in doubt, the juries there refer to Erskine May. And this is what Erskine May states. Confidence motion. From time to time, the opposition puts down a motion expressing a lack of confidence in the government. By established convention, the government always accedes to the demand from the leader of the opposition to allot a day for the discussion of a motion tabled by the official opposition, which, in the government's view, would have the effect of testing the confidence of the House. In allotting a day for this purpose, the government is entitled to have regard to the exigencies of its own business, but a reasonably early day is invariably found. This convention is founded, says the book, on the recognized position of the opposition as a potential government which guarantees the legitimacy of such an interruption on the normal course of business. Now, for its part, says the book, the government has everything to gain by meeting such a direct challenge to its authority at the earliest possible moment. That's what Erskine May says in its 24th edition at page 344. Now, therefore, based on this convention alone, the motion of no confidence should be put to debate at the earliest possible time. And the earliest possible time is November the 2nd, when Parliament is set to reconvene again. And therefore, we must now compare the Speaker's argument against what the provisions of the Constitution say. Now, the Speaker refers to Standing Order 14, which he says prevents him from putting the motion of no confidence to the Dewan Rakyat unless the relevant minister consents. However, let us test the Speaker's arguments against the constitutional provisions. First, the government can only be formed by the appointment of a Prime Minister. This is what Article 43, Clause 2 says. The cabinet shall be appointed as follows, that is to say, the King shall first appoint as Prime Minister. Now, look at these words. The words shall first appoint as Prime Minister are followed by to preside over the cabinet a member of the House of Representatives, and that is qualified by the following words. That man is one who is in His Majesty's judgment likely to command the confidence of the majority of the members of the House. If that is so, and if the first officer of the cabinet, the Prime Minister, doesn't have the Dewan Rakyat's confidence, then under Article 43, Clause 4, if the PM ceases to command the confidence of the majority of the members of the House of Representatives, then unless at his request the King dissolves Parliament, the Prime Minister shall tender the resignation of the Cabinet. So, how then can the Speaker of Parliament ask the mover of the motion of no confidence to go ask permission of a member of the Cabinet? If that is not unconstitutional, I don't know what is. Finally, let's deal with standing orders. First, although the standing orders regulate the conduct of Parliament, they cannot override the intent and spirit behind the clear words of Article 43 of the Constitution, that is, if you recall, on the question of the MP's confidence in the Prime Minister. Second, the Speaker cannot abdicate his duties to the Cabinet. On the day he accepted office, bending over the table, raising his hands, the Speaker swore to protect the Constitution and the rule of law, if you recall. Now, he cannot now capitulate and hand over his duties to a member of the Cabinet. As the leader of the people in Parliament, he cannot pass the buck to a Cabinet Minister. Third, in Parliament, the Speaker has the higher rank. He must act for the people, not on behalf of the government. The Speaker is the presiding officer of the House, for goodness sake, and has overall control of the House. He decides on points of order, he interprets the standing orders, and finally, there are no specific rules on motions of no confidence in the standing orders. Therefore, under Order 100, the Speaker must define the procedure, and this is because Standing Order 100 states, all matters not specifically provided for in the orders and all questions relating to the detailed working of these orders shall be regulated in such manner as the Tuan Yang Di-Pertuan may from time to time direct. Now, the Speaker has extensive residual powers, and these powers are there for him to protect democracy and the rule of law and the Constitution and not to defeat them. The Speaker is the last bulwark between the people and the forces that would destroy the rule of law. If the Speaker will not stand on the side of the people, what then becomes of the people? That, my dear friends, is the question. But if the Speaker himself refuses, you have nothing to worry about. Under Article 55, the King can summon Parliament and have a meeting arranged. The Constitution gives him the power no matter what the Speaker says, because the right to have the people's voice heard is a constitutional right, and the King can invoke his constitutional powers under Article 55 and call and summon Parliament to have the people's voice heard. That, my dear friends, concludes today's video on this subject. If you like, please subscribe and share this widely with your friends. It's necessary for us to understand the Constitution, and I'm doing everything I can to help you. Have a good day, and thank you.